Hey guys, welcome back. And today we're going to be doing a little bit of a different type of video. As you guys know, I am a Colts fan. Today I have a special guest. Cody Felger is here from the Bring the Juice podcast. Welcome to the show, Cody, and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate the invitation. Always good to come on, talk a little NFL draft, talk some Colts football, and man, it's about time. It's been a lot of speculation, a lot of mock drafts, a lot of different scenarios. So, yeah, really excited. And from a content standpoint, I'm sure you feel this like it's just time at this point.
Yeah, it is. And there, like you said, so much speculation around the Colts in this draft season. We've had rumors before the Panthers traded up, they were going to trade to number one, and it's just been an ongoing cycle since the end of the season. We'll just jump right into it here. It is April 14th at the time of recording this, and the Colts just hosted CJ Stroud for a visit today. So what do you think about CJ Stroud? Is there any way he's there at 4? And let's just kind of talk through these scenarios of each 3 quarterbacks, starting with CJ Stroud.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't see a scenario where he's there at 4, to be completely honest with you, because I do feel like, even if Houston does take, a non-quarterback, I think Arizona is going to have a ton of people interested in that number 3 pick. And if the Colts aren't willing to move up, then I just see a team jumping ahead of them and getting CJ. Personally, I love CJ Stroud. I've been a CJ Stroud guy, really going back to last year. And so I was really excited if the Colts had an opportunity at him. I mean, I guess it tells me that the Colts do feel like there still is an opportunity potentially for him to become available. I don't necessarily see that being the case unless the Colts do trade up to 3. But yeah, I mean, CJ Stroud, I think for me is like, he's so refined, he's so accurate, and the good thing is, he's got the typical size and he can get a little bit bigger. He can bulk up a little bit. So
For sure.
I think CJ Stroud, is honestly one of the better prospects in this draft. And I'm really excited for whoever gets him. I think he's going to be a pretty good player in the league.
I agree. And you mentioned that you don't think there's any way he's there at 4. I know in my most recent mock draft, we had the Texans go defense because it seems like there's some smoke there. DeMeco Ryans defensive-minded guy. Will Anderson is, I think, would have been the number 1 overall pick last year. He's a phenomenal edge rusher. And so the Texans getting a dominant edge rusher. What does Arizona do at 3? We had the Raiders trade up, but actually take Anthony Richardson. Now, I feel that that's a possibility, especially with some of these teams picking later, unless Tennessee moves up. But I don't know that the Cardinals want to separate themselves so far from the pack. But if Tennessee moved up to get Stroud, I feel like if there was a team to move up, it would probably be the Raiders or the Seahawks. I don't know that they would want to go CJ Stroud, considering that the upside of Anthony Richardson is so large. And he can you got starting quarterbacks there. Jimmy Garoppolo for the Raiders. You got Geno there. Do you think if a team was to move up to 3, there's any way that they would pass on Stroud for Richardson's upside?
I could see that. Yeah, I could honestly see that. I think the perfect scenario for Richardson is that he doesn't have to start right away, right? That he has another quarterback that he can learn under, he can sit under for, however long it needs to be. In the Colts case, it might be a lot less of a timeline than maybe say a Seattle or, Raiders or something like that. But yeah, I do think a really good scenario for Richardson would be to go, get working with an offensive minded coach, but also working with a scenario at the quarterback room for a team that doesn't necessarily need a quarterback, say day one. So Josh McDaniels is a quarterback guy. He's an offensive minded coach. So could that be a scenario where he just falls in love with the traits and the Raiders, kind of bet on him for their future? And, learning from Jimmy G is a pretty good thing for Anthony Richardson. So I could see a scenario where that definitely happens. But then I also wonder, from Arizona's standpoint, how far do they want to go back? And also, do they want to potentially give a division rival their franchise quarterback? I don't know if Arizona's in that spot where trading with Seattle necessarily makes sense, but I could definitely see a Vegas Raiders or something like that, or Tennessee or something like that happening. Although my thing is, I think if Tennessee traded up, they would probably try to go more Stroud because they don't really have another option right now at quarterback, right? They already have a project in Malik Willis. So would it make more sense for them to go up and, go get a guy like CJ Stroud there at 3? But Yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see kind of how that plays out. It definitely is. You just have to look at the quarterback room and you can make a case for, each team to take a certain quarterback based off of how their room currently is. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from the beginning of this, while we're still on the CJ Stroud topic, once the season ended, I was like, I want CJ Stroud in a Colts uniform. And so, I mean, you mentioned it. He's got great size at the quarterback position, pretty solid arm. And yeah, there were some questions about his mobility at the collegiate level, but he kind of put those questions to rest after that college football playoff performance against Georgia. I think he would fit well in Shane's offense, who has developed a good amount of quarterbacks. How do you think CJ Stroud would fit in the offense?
I mean, I think it'd be pretty seamless, right? And, he's got the mobility like he talked about. He just doesn't use it a lot. And maybe that's something, a new piece of his game that Shane Steichen could unlock there. I mean, the biggest question mark with CJ is not even his fault. It's, how much did he benefit from all the weapons around him? Whereas some of these other quarterbacks like Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, and some of these guys, they didn't have the type of talent that he did around him for all those years. And so you do that is like kind of the biggest question mark in him, but like, certainly he showed a lot, I think, in that Georgia game for sure. Some of the big time throws, some of the big time plays that he was making. I mean, he's not the reason they lost that game. Let's be completely real. Like he's the reason they were even in that game. So I think he showed that like when the moment matters, he delivered. And so, there was questions about that a little bit. And so I really do like CJ Stroud quite a bit. I think he is my favorite quarterback just because I think longevity, for longevity's sake, I think he'll be a quarterback that is built to last in today's NFL, and him, Richardson obviously is more physically gifted. He's the most physically gifted quarterback we've seen in a long time, but CJ Stroud is very physically gifted as well. And he lit it up at the combine, man. He was looking fantastic. And so you just think, man, what Shane Steichen could do with CJ Stroud under center. I mean, I think it makes you feel really excited about the potential there. If he was available somehow and the Colts were able to grab him, I think that's a huge steal for them.
100% agree. We would talk about Bryce Young, but I think we'll just kind of get this out of the way. We talked about this before we got on here. I think there's 0%. He's on the board there at 4.
Yeah.
I think Carolina seems to be the favorites to take him at 1. And if he's not there, if they don't take him at 1, the Texans will take him at 2. I have no doubt. The only reason I think the Texans might look defense is if Bryce Young is off the board, which it seems like kind of seems to be the consensus right now. But let's just, for fun's sake, let's say Bryce was to fall and you had your option. Would Bryce is he your QB1?
I think he is. People do have questions about the size, which is legitimate, but like, yeah, I mean, he's just incredible. Like he's an incredible playmaker. He's an incredible guy that just makes plays on the run. He's just a creator like none other. So I think Bryce Young for me is the number 1. And if he's a couple inches taller and 20 pounds heavier, I mean, he's a clear cut number 1, and we're not even having a question about it. So yeah, I do think Bryce Young, he's got the mental game down to a T. He can throw it and he can place it where a lot of quarterbacks can't. And so, yeah, I think he is my number 1 right now. Now, how long will he last, I guess, is the biggest question. And, where will he go? If he goes to Carolina, will they be able to maximize his talents and, get him to do, be able to be smart with the ball and, not, we've seen that with some of those quarterbacks, right, where it hasn't really worked out in certain ways for some. And then for some it has, it just really depends, I think, where he does go, and so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out for sure.
I think Carolina's the perfect landing spot for him. I mean, you got a quarterbacks coach there in Reich who kind of feel like we did him dirty. We never really got him that young quarterback to develop, but he's got the offensive line there. Yeah, there's some receiver question marks, but that team is built and they've got incredible defense. That team is a really good situation for him, but we're not talking about the Panthers today. Let's talk about the other 2 quarterbacks in this class who I think Stroud and Young are the clear cut 1 and 2. And then there's the 3 and 4, which seems like Richardson is QB3, but let's just talk about Anthony Richardson. What are your thoughts on Anthony Richardson? Because physically and his testing was off the charts. We've never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
But there are major concerns there with his decision-making, his timing, his accuracy. Do you think he's worth the gamble? Would you rather take, say, Will Levis, which we'll get to Will Levis in a little bit, but just talk to me about Anthony Richardson, your thoughts on him.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about like a high ceiling. I mean, this dude's off the charts, right? His ceiling is the best quarterback in the NFL. Like it really, I think he's got all that talent, like to do that. But again, it is just talent. It is just, ability right now, and just physical ability. And he hasn't put it together, right? I mean, a lot of people like to compare him to, Cam Newton and some of those guys in college, but like he wasn't doing those things that Newton and guys like Newton and Lamar Jackson were doing in college, right? He wasn't a Heisman front runner or anything like that. So while he does have a lot of the same physical tools at his disposal, you're right. He is a lot more raw. He has a lot he needs to work on. And it seems like a lot of those things are very mechanical things that, he's only played 13 games. So he is still extremely raw in that, but he's only going to be 21 when the season starts. He's got all the ability in the world. He seems like he's a very hard worker, a guy that wants to get better. And for me personally, I think with the route the Colts went as their head coach, they got a coach that has had some track history in Shane Steichen with working with the last two places he's been, two young quarterbacks and getting them to be some of the best in the NFL. And so when it comes to, the Richardson versus Levis debate, I will always go with the guy with the higher ceiling, because at the end of the day, you got to let your coaches do what you brought them in to do. Right. And so for me, I'd rather take a shot. Yeah, maybe Levis is more ready to go day one. But if, Richardson, you feel like his ceiling is so much more higher, where maybe Levis, you think he could be a fringe top 10 quarterback, but Richardson could be a top quarterback. I think it's worth the risk personally. And if it doesn't work out, if he stinks year one and you're terrible, I mean, you still have an opportunity. It's a pretty darn good class next year too. Yeah. So you do have an opportunity. I don't know if the Colts would do that, but we've seen crazier things. But regardless, you'll still get a really good pick and be able to kind of build around him if you see some tangible things there. But I will say this, and I don't have the exact stat right in front of me, but Anthony Richardson, he started out pretty rough last year in Florida. But then as the season progressed along, he actually got a lot better in especially his touchdown to interception ratio. So it does show that like he is trending up. I do feel like that is kind of where his stock is right now. He wasn't great. He's not perfect. He still has a lot of things to work on, but I do think he is trending up. And I think he's a guy that wants to get better. He's going to put in the work. And for me, it's like, I would, and this is not a shot against Levis or anything, but like if the guy has, everything you're looking for, but he just needs more developed, it just makes too much sense for me to go with a guy who's going to be 21 years old and has all the talent in the world. And, people have raved about him. People that do this for a living talk about how incredible this guy is as an athlete, and just as a quarterback as well, and the potential there. And so you get a guy that's taking quarterbacks with potential and actually turn them into legitimate top 5, top 10 quarterbacks. So for me, Anthony Richardson, if he is there and it is between him and Levis, I don't think you really overthink it. I mean, you did bring in Gardner Minshew for a reason. And I do think he can be that bridge quarterback if you deem Richardson not ready to go from day one. But I do think eventually he has to get on the field this year. But it's not like you pigeonhole yourself into a corner where your only other quarterback on the roster is like Nick Foles or something, which I don't know why he's still on the roster, but that's another topic. But I would say you are in a lot better spot at quarterback where you don't have to get a guy who, you would love for Richardson to be your day one starter and never look back, but you don't have to have that right away. And I think that's a good situation the Colts find themselves in, similar to like what the Raiders would be in, or similar to, the other teams that would be potentially trying to get a quarterback that kind of have more of that veteran option there that they brought in this offseason. So for me, Richardson is the guy that I would go with if I was sitting there at 4 and he and Levis were the two guys you're debating over.
Yeah, and I'm only bringing that up because I feel like most people in the Colts corner would go with Richardson. I think there's a lot of buzz from Colts fans. They want Anthony Richardson with a horseshoe on his helmet next year. I am one of those people included, assuming Stroud and Young are gone, obviously. But Richardson, I mean, you can see the arm talent. He's got an unbelievable arm. The mobility is there. And, I mean, when he gets out of the pocket, he can see the field. He can move with his legs. Like, he's got what you're looking for in a mobile quarterback in today's NFL. And he does kind of fit the Colts offense. Now with Steichen, who with the Eagles, they ran a lot of RPOs. And just imagining him and Taylor and RPOs, design quarterback runs. I mean, the offense could be really scary there. But for some reason, there's this report going around that the Colts have Will Levis as the top quarterback on their board, and that if it's between Richardson and Levis, they'd go Levis. Do you think there's a smokescreen? Do you think there's some fire there? What are your thoughts on this?
I think nobody knows, and people are just trying to throw out things, throw crap out of the wall and try to see what sticks. Like the Colts aren't a team that's going to let other people know what they're doing. They are so tight-lipped about everything. Like, I just don't like, people can come out with their speculation, but I just don't put a whole lot of weight into it because I've heard a lot of other people say the complete opposite. So for me, it's just kind of like, I won't believe it till I see it, basically. But yeah, that's just kind of where I am on it. I don't necessarily see that as something where it's like a slam dunk kind of thing, because I don't think the Colts would honestly let it out. I really don't think they would. I think they're going to be very tight-lipped, really up until they select their quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. And we could talk about Will Levis now, who great first season at Kentucky after transferring from Penn State. He was fantastic in 2021. 2022, bit of a down year. The accuracy, the interceptions. He was banged up all season long. You can point to a million different things. Lost offensive lineman to the draft, lost Wan'Dale Robinson to the draft, lost a lot of talent, but you can still see a very high ceiling for Will Levis.
Yeah.
I mean, Richardson high, but it's a high ceiling where I think he could be a top 10, 12 quarterback in the right system if everything goes right. But there are some question marks there. So let's talk about Will Levis. Where do you have him ranked in terms of your quarterbacks, and how do you think he would fit this offense?
Yeah, and again, like this isn't there's a lot of overhate for Will Levis, I think.
Agreed.
Like, I don't think Will Levis is a bad quarterback. I really don't. I think he was dealt a crappy situation last year in Kentucky. He had injuries. He didn't have a whole lot of a supporting cast around him. And but also it was, a lot of it his fault as well. So but for me, he's my quarterback 4. But, if that does happen and they're really between those two guys, obviously I have a preference of Richardson because I think the ceiling's there. But, like, I'm not going to be mad if the Colts go and get Will Levis because, I just want a rookie quarterback at this point, But Levis is still, in his low 20s. So he's still a guy that I feel like you can develop and you can still get, obviously I feel like he has more issues that you're going to have to coach out of him than maybe Richardson does, just because Richardson doesn't have as many games to his name. But I do think it's something that can be fixable. I think Shane can fix him as well and get him in the right system and get him, back, basically build back his confidence as a quarterback. I really do think he can, and kind of get some of those bad habits that he developed last year in Kentucky out of him. And it will take some time with either of these guys. Like, it's not like Anthony Richardson might, come in day one or Will Levis will come in day one and just be all of a sudden just Andrew Luck of 2012. Like, that's just not a reality. These guys all have question marks. They all have warts. They all have things that they struggle in and are not great in. But I do think Will Levis is a pretty good prospect, and I would not be mad if the Colts went after him and they did bring him in as their quarterback, because I do think there are a lot of traits you like there. Doesn't have as strong of an arm as Anthony Richardson, but he still has a really good arm. Yeah. He's got the size. Like, he's got the franchise quarterback build. So for me, like, Will Levis would be a guy that I would probably, I have him at 4, but like, I can't fault the Colts because at least they're getting a rookie quarterback, and it's better than what we've had. So
yeah.
I mean, I think Steichen. I'm at the place now where I just want them to get a quarterback. I don't really. I have my preference, but like, I won't be mad if they pick one quarterback over the other, just because I just think Steichen can do it with any quarterback. Personally, I think he can. His track record's shown that. So I think Levis can be a good player in the right system.
I agree, and you brought up a point that I 100% agree with. I think Levis, I don't think I've ever seen a prospect get the amount of hate Will Levis does, because, yeah, he had his concerns, but you got to point to the bigger picture. Lost the offensive coordinator at Kentucky as well from the year prior. It was just a complete disaster in Kentucky, and it showed, but he showed some good things in some games for sure. I like Levis. I agree he's my QB4. Would probably be, of the top 4, the one I'd want the least. But if the Colts get Levis, I do think he could be a really good player. I think Levis, obviously we've heard this, he's the most day one ready starter. You could put him in to start week 1, and I think he would be good to go. Comes from an offense at Kentucky that ran a pro style, so he kind of understands how the not the NFL game works, but how from an offensive standpoint it's supposed to look. So I do like that about him, but the upside of Richardson is just insane.
Yeah.
We're going to move on to another possibility here. There have been talks, obviously, that the Colts go get Lamar Jackson. And it seemed like with the Odell Beckham signing in Baltimore that maybe Lamar was going to come back. But then Odell had his press conference, and it didn't seem like he really knew if Lamar was going to be there or not, which I don't think he would sign there unless he knew. So do you think there's any way that the Colts go out and get Lamar Jackson?
I think that I personally, based off of what I've heard from Shane Steichen a couple of days ago, I feel like that ship is pretty much sailed at this point. I think the Colts are focused in on drafting a guy. Now, I will say the only scenario I see where the Colts would go after Lamar Jackson is if they don't get a quarterback. If something happens where somehow, some way they don't get one of their quarterbacks they want, and they trade down or they trade that pick or whatever to acquire Lamar. But I really don't think it's a strong possibility. I really don't. Baltimore still wants. It's not like Baltimore's like looking to ship him out. They still want to keep him if possible. So I don't really see that as a scenario for the Colts right now. I just think with what all the stuff Jim Irsay's been through, the scar tissue with kind of the retreads, if you will, at quarterback the last couple of years, I just think they're going to draft a quarterback. I almost think it's a lock at this point. So I don't really see it as a reality anymore. I think there was some steam building a few weeks ago about it, but I mean, I just think at this point, with how much it would cost, how much it would kind of, cripple your ability to do things on your roster, I don't know how much sense it makes right away for a team that clearly isn't contending right now. He would make them a contender for sure, but it's just not a team that I don't think like all of a sudden you're Super Bowl favorites or anything like that with where the Colts current roster is. So as much as I like Lamar, I think he's a great player. I just don't see it as a thing where the Colts are going to be really like they have the option on the table, I think, but I think it's like one of their last, options right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. As much as I would love Lamar, the price tag I think is going to be ridiculous, and we'll just see. I would rather have one of these quarterbacks that we could develop and just see what you have. I do want to go down a couple of other possibilities. What do you think? I've heard that in some mock drafts, the Colts take Tyree Wilson or Will Anderson. Do you think that on a scale of 1 to 10, if you had to rank the likelihood that the Colts take a defensive guy, 1 being the least likely, at 10 being the most likely, where would you rank that on the possibilities? Because I think it's like a 0.5.
I was going to say like a 1 or a 1.5 or something like that, just because it's Chris Ballard. That's the only reason why I even give it any sliver of a chance.
Yep.
But no, I think if that happens and they even start discussing that, Irsay steps in and he says, no, you're taking a quarterback. Like, yeah. I think he's to that point where like, if they don't take a quarterback, I think he might just be done with Ballard on the spot. Like, and hopefully I don't think that will happen. But like Irsay has been so adamant about drafting a guy, with that top pick, because who knows, if that guy turns out to be good, you're hopefully not drafting here in the top 5 very often. So, yeah, I really don't see that being an option as much as I would love. Like if the Colts already had their quarterback, like if this was next year's draft and the Colts were here, absolutely. Will Anderson's a slam dunk for me. But yeah, and also the Colts, they did sign a defensive end, Ebicom as well. They do have 2 young guys there in Quiddy and Dio, and they still like those guys. So I think if you sit here next year and you're in a similar situation where it's a top defensive player, I think it's definitely an option. But right now, no, the Colts can't afford to kick the can down the road at quarterback. So I just think they're going to draft a guy. And I don't really see a scenario where it's any of the other defensive players, even though I really like those 2 players. I think they're fantastic. I just don't think it's a reality for the Colts personally.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like I don't think Ballard would make that pick this year because his job is on the line. If the Colts suck this year, I think he's gone. And so I think you kind of have to take a swing here because if you draft a quarterback and it hits, you save your job. So he's kind of drafting for his job here. I've heard some talk about the Colts trading back and getting Hendon Hooker. And look, I live in Tennessee. I'm a Vols fan. Hendon Hooker's a great player, but I don't know. The ACL tear, the age, horrible offense. I just don't know how that's going to translate to the NFL. There are major concerns there. Quickly, what are your thoughts on Hendon Hooker?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a fine prospect. I just don't think it makes a whole lot of sense for the Colts to do that. I think they got to get one of these guys that's going to come in, no injury concerns, and is going to be able to come in and really take the reins. And I like Hooker, and I think if he stayed healthy, then maybe we do have that conversation. But as of right now, I don't really like that. I think the Colts can't afford to get cute and do what they've done before, where it's more quantity over quality. I think they have to go quality, especially at that first pick. So. I really think trading down is maybe more of an option day 2 as opposed to day 1. But I mean, the only thing I want the Colts to trade is potentially trade up with Arizona, but I don't even know if that's going to happen. So I think the only option for them to trade is up, not down.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go into day 2 because I think we're in agreement. Stroud or Richardson are the guys that we're looking at here. Day 2, number of ways the Colts could go here. They got Isaiah McKenzie. I still think receiver is a pretty big need for the Colts. I think the wide receiver room is super slim. You could go edge rusher even after getting Ebukam. You could go with a corner. I think that's probably the big one, especially after losing Stephon Gilmore. Left tackle. I don't know how I feel about Bernhard Raimann. There was some high highs and there were some low lows with Bernhard Raimann last year. The guard position needs to be addressed. So there's a lot of holes in this Colts roster. So take me through some prospects that you really are interested in for the Colts to take on day 2.
Yeah. So I would say if I'm ranking these needs, I would say corner for me is the clear-cut number 1, just because, I mean, you look at your roster right now, your number 2 outside corner is Dallas Flowers right now, which I liked him as a rookie, but he was an undrafted rookie. So I think like Ringo, Khalil Ringo is a guy that a lot of people have liked a lot. I think he's an option there for the Colts at 35. I think there's like a scenario maybe where the Colts trade down and go get a guy like Julius Brents, who a lot of people have projected to be maybe there if the Colts were to trade down and maybe get another like a 3rd round pick or something within that trade or whatever they would do. They've done that before where they've traded out of their initial pick and they've gotten excess picks, and that's how they ended up with 4 3rd round picks last year or something like that. So I could see that being a scenario as well. I didn't know if you had any guys as well that kind of have piqued your interest. I mean, as far as wide receiver goes, this is maybe a guy that maybe be more 3rd, 4th round. Jonathan Mingo is a big name. He's a big athletic receiver. He's got over a 9.5 RAS score, which we know Chris Ballard is big on RAS scores from what he did last year in the draft. So you get him a super athletic quarterback in Richardson and a super athletic wide receiver in a guy like Mingo, and that's just a recipe for success, I think. So
you bring up Jonathan Mingo, and I just did a profile on Mingo, and I like Mingo. There are some question marks with his route running, didn't run a great route tree at Ole Miss, but I kind of think he fits the offense pretty perfectly for what the Colts need, because they need a receiver who you can get the ball in the field in open space and he could just make a big play. I don't think Pittman's doing that. I don't think Pierce is really that guy either. I don't know what McKenzie is. I think Mingo kind of fits perfectly. I don't think you take him at 35. I think if you trade it back, but I kind of think he might go in the first 2 rounds. I've heard some buzz there. I do like Jonathan Mingo as an option. At corner, really depends on who's on the board. I really, really like Cam Smith from South Carolina. Very physical cornerback. Kaylee Ringo's good. I think he might translate better to a safety at the next level. Not a great hip rotator. Doesn't move extremely well, but he's sticky in man coverage, which is something you love to see. But if I'm the Colts and I'm looking to draft here, I kind of think that guard position, you lost Glowinski, and I feel like your whole offensive line kind of blew up. I think looking guard at 35 is where I would go. I really like Osiris Torrance, obviously. Yeah. I don't think he's going to be on the board there, honestly, at 35. But I'm going to say Steve Avila from TCU, I think, is right there. I think he's a fantastic guard prospect, was amazing at the Senior Bowl, tested out pretty well at the Combine as well. I think Steve Avila is one of my favorite prospects in this draft. And then we're going to talk about some cornerbacks later in the draft, rounds 4 or 5. I like Darius Rush from South Carolina. I think he's a really good option. DJ Turner, I don't know where he goes because he tested out so well at the Combine, but I think he could be a really nice option for the Colts. And then some late round wide receiver guys I like. I like Tyler Scott from Cincinnati,
Yep.
maybe. Jaden Reed's interesting. I like Xavier Hutchinson from Iowa State. We mentioned Mingo. This is it's not a super great wide receiver class, as has been talked about plenty of times, but there's some quality players down the board that I don't think are going to be superstars, but they're going to fill needs. And I think there's a few of those guys here for the Colts. I don't know if there's any other prospects that you're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned. I just wanted to go back real fast, talking about Torrance real fast, Osiris. I do think center is an underrated need that we don't talk about, because Colts, they were pretty public, like they were trying to trade Ryan Kelly. So I really don't think they view him as a long-term solution anymore at center, although he is there this year. You do think maybe this is more of a 2024 need if you think about maybe like a day 2 pick or a day 3 pick even. Getting a guy that can maybe kind of compete for, with Danny Pinter for that backup role. And then next year, if you decide to move on from Ryan Kelly, you have a guy that's been in your system for a year and you feel good and you can let, a couple of those guys battle it out for the starting role. I could see that potentially being an option as well. And, maybe year one, maybe he does play some guard. He competes with Will Fries for right guard. But I do think you just need to create competition in there. But I would like a guy with some position flexibility, like Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin as well. I think he could be a guy that could kind of, go in there and could challenge right away for some playing time. So I think regardless of what you got to do, what's that?
John Michael Schmitz is another guy who I think could be in play there.
Yeah, so I think whatever you got to do, you got to create competition in there. You got to create depth. I mean, that was a big issue last year for this team, right? They had 2 guys that rolled up there as day 1 starters, and then they both got benched. So, I mean, they can't afford to have that happen again. I really don't think left tackle's a need. I think Ryman showed you enough. Like, he wasn't perfect, but I do think he showed steady improvement as the season went on, enough to give him an opportunity. Now, I do think you still need to create competition there with him. I think you need to bring in a vet offensive tackle of some sort to compete with him in some fashion. And, I also do think there are a few, options in free agency at guard as well. I think the guy that's kind of, people have talked about, Dalton Risner, could be an option after the draft. It's been reported that the Colts have been interested in adding, an interior offensive lineman and a corner, I believe. And it looks like they'll probably try to do that after the draft, is my guess at this point. So I could see that being an option where maybe guard they don't address as much in the draft, maybe early on. Maybe they get a day 3 guy and then they sign a vet in there and they just have a few more guys that they feel good about as well. There's a lot of routes the Colts could go here, trying to fill some of these positions, but it'll be interesting, man, to see which way they go, because there's so many different positions. I do think corner has to be addressed, probably in that, in that second round for sure. It'll just be interesting to see who is the guy that they have.
I will mention one more name here, because I think if he had an ACL tear towards the end of the season, but if he had stayed healthy, I think he would be arguably a first-round pick, and that's Garrett Williams from Syracuse. This guy was fantastic in zone coverage, especially great size. He has the injury concerns. He's fallen down boards. I think the Colts could take him in round 3, and I would absolutely think that's a home run pick if he can come back to form how he was prior to injury, because I think he was a very good corner. I did some evals on him earlier on in the season. I think he's fantastic. There's a lot of ways the Colts could go. I think safety. Do you think they could address safety at all?
Maybe. That's an interesting one, because they did just draft 2 guys that played, one guy played extremely well. Nick Cross, they traded up for last year. So they have to have some level of confidence in him. I could see that maybe being more of a day 3 pick, maybe try to add a 4th safety in there, but I don't know, man. It's tough, especially, Julian Blackman played a little bit of slot last year. So maybe he gets more of an extended look there. And then maybe you need a little bit more of another 3rd safety there. But I think they have 3 really good young safeties. So I don't necessarily view that as like a top need for them, but it could be a surprising pick there, maybe in those later rounds there.
Yeah, like we've mentioned, the Colts have holes all over this roster. There's a million different ways they could go, but that's the beauty of the draft. Just the speculation beforehand, kind of like as fans just wondering where our teams are going to go. So, there any final thoughts you have as we get ready and wrap up here?
Oh, it's going to be interesting. I'm really excited to see who are the new Colts here in a couple weeks. And, it's obviously all revolves around the quarterback. So it's weird to have a situation here just because the Colts really haven't had, first round picks the last couple of years. And the ones they have had have been, in the 20s or later. So it definitely is going to be interesting to have a pick in the top 5, something we're not really used to really since, I guess, 2018. But yeah, it's going to be a fun draft, and I'm really excited to see what exactly happens. And, kind of the drama that unfolds if, Carolina goes and takes Bryce Young and then everything goes crazy. Like, it's a lot of fun, but I'm intrigued to see it.
If you had to make, last question, if you had to make a prediction, who are the Colts taking it for? Who are you going to say?
Oh, man, that's a really good question. I'm going to trust that they're going to trust Steichen. So I'm going to go with Richardson. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe they'll go with Levis, and I'm completely wrong, but I think it's going to be one of those two. But I guess I'll say Richardson.
Well, guys, you heard it here first. Anthony Richardson to the Colts. Thank you so much, Cody, for coming on the show today. That's going to do it for us in this video. I had a ton of fun. Make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe. I'll leave Cody's links down in the comment section below. You guys can go check his stuff out. That's going to do it for me. Make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe if you are new. I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.